Hi, folks. I'm really excited to be here, and thanks a lot to the organizers for giving me this opportunity. Today I'd like to talk to you about creativity in fragrances, and I hope that it'll resonate with you, and I also hope that there will be a few new things that you'll come across and which might be interesting for reapplication in your areas of expertise as well. So when a good friend of mine, he went on a vacation to Myanmar, he did this wonderful photo montage of his travel, and many of the pictures were absolutely brilliant. He's very talented in photography. So when I saw some of the pictures, I was really inspired. And this particular photograph, this really resonated with me. And when I was really inspired by it, and I thought that how cool would it be if I were to actually translate this photograph into a fragrance. And what was sort of illuminating those thoughts in my mind was the contrast that were coming in this photograph. There is this light and shadow, play of light and shadow. This lady is, she's obviously smoking a cigarette, and you can see the cigarette smoke. This photograph has been taken from inside the compartment of a train, looking outside. And this lady, of course, she has this attitude on her face that, I've seen it all, I've done it all, and frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn. So, yeah, that's how it is, isn't it? So I thought that, it would be really cool to sort of translate that into a fragrance. And so then basically, I said that if I have to look at this picture and break it down into different pieces and then translate each of those pieces into the language of perfumery, which is ingredients, and how would that work out to be? From the attitude of the lady itself, it definitely looked like that this has to be a bold perfume. This has to be a classic seasoned perfume. The skin was very fascinating to me, and that was sort of this, again, seasoned skin, leathery, strong. Obviously, there's a lot of drama being created by the smoke, so there is definitely, tobacco has to play a central role in this picture, in the perfume as well. And then, of course, through my travels within Asia and generally experiencing different fragrances and flavors, I came across the fact that in Indonesia, which is not where this picture was taken, and that is a little bit of a creative license that I'm using. In Indonesia, they actually use clove to flavor tobacco. And they also use betel nut to flavor tobacco, but not while smoking, while chewing. So again, I took some poetic license there, and I said, well, nutmeg looks like betel nut. So, what if I were to infuse a little bit of nutmeg and clove in my tobacco? And then, of course, there was the central sort of, thing in the picture, which is this brilliant, sparkling blue dress that this lady is wearing. What do I do with that? And then basically I decided that maybe this I could interpret by using, by creating an image through perfumery, which is cool and it's blue, and it essentially comes from a combination of citrus oils such as bergamot, along with mint, and along with geranium. And geranium is a flower which has got the aspects of citronella and rose. So it has this heat, warm, cool, sort of a sensate kind of a feeling. Along with mint, it has a very refreshing, cooling effect. And to me, that could be the sparkling, refreshing contrast to everything else that I've talked about. Because everything else in this picture, at least in my mind, was golden brown, coming from all the leather and the tobacco. Right, so So the final formula of the perfume turns out to be this, and these are probably some of the most important ingredients. So the lady in blue essentially was a bunch of a whole lot of these ingredients. And, but this was not my first attempt. This was actually an outcome of a whole lot of prototyping. And so there were dozens of prototypes out there before I nailed down the final formula, the final recipe. So if you recall, what I was saying was that I had to break down the picture into smaller individual components. I had to get the smoky right. And in order to get the smoky right, I was playing with patchouli, vetiver, and guaiac wood in all of those different proportions, 5:1:2, 4:3:3, and so on. Then once I got my smoky right, now I wanted to make that smoky not just smoky, but create something golden brown, luxurious. And so I converted that into rich tobacco by layering up the smoky with woody ambery notes and sweet notes. And again, there were many ratios out there. Once I got that right, I said, okay, I've got my rich tobacco, which includes my smoky accord. By the way, parlance, accord. So each of those, like patchouli, vetiver, guaiac wood, and isobutyl quinoline down there, safraline, all of those are ingredients. But the combination, each of these little blocks, is an accord. And that's just perfume language. A combination of things that has its own identity and stands for something is called an accord. I think it's borrowed from music. Then, of course, the leather accord came in where I mixed safraline, which smells like saffron, isobutyl quinoline, which smells like burnt plastic, and natural resins to come up with my tiny little leathery accord. And I did something similar for the blue dress, where I was playing with different ratios of geranium, mint, and citrus oils. And then basically I started putting all of these blocks together to complete the picture. And that's how I reached the final sort of formula that you saw on the previous screen. So then this became like a, this creative exercise became a case study for this innovation forum. By the way, this creative exercise, along with a few other multisensorial aspects, is being set up as an exhibition in Leuven, which is a town in Belgium. So it's basically my friend who has he will be putting it up as a photo gallery. Along with that, there'll be this fragrance, there'll be like live music and Asian food and some poetry which has been written on some of these pictures, on the photographs. So anyway, coming back to this, creativity and innovation, and when I think about it and the way I approach it in perfumery, so there is a part of it which is the unconscious thought, and then obviously there's a part of it which is the conscious thought. And the unconscious thought really begins with the illumination, which is the spark, that inspiration that triggers on when you and this is a response to a certain stimuli that has inspired you. And as you start developing it further, I kind of jumped a little far ahead. Yeah, so as you start developing the illumination, as we call it, a little bit further, it is really about finding the previously unknown relationship between different ideas, or building an associative network of unrelated ideas. And to me, this is a fundamentally really important part of creativity. A creative thought has to be novel by definition, and that novelty can come only when you have stopped looking at your own immediate periphery of skills and started reaching outwards to get new ideas and new thoughts into your own skills. And this ability of building this sort of network of unrelated ideas is a key part of actually infusing creative thoughts into your idea. The alternative to this is that if suppose you are is problem solving, and there's nothing wrong with it. I mean, most of the times in our jobs, in our daily jobs, we are problem solving, and sometimes we have a creative solution. And the distinction is that a creative solution is a very generative thing. When you have a creative idea, it triggers more ideas, or it triggers the application of that idea into more problems. While when you are problem solving, what you're looking at is that there is a problem and then there is a known solution, and you're bringing the two things together. You're using your own known knowledge. It's not novel, but it solves a problem. There's nothing wrong with it, but it's important for us to distinguish the two thought process so that we are self-aware of, how we are approaching problem solving. Is it a creative approach or is it not? And like I said before, while there's nothing wrong with it, but it's important to be self-aware of that. As we've started building this sort of network of unrelated ideas, then we start sort of, connecting the dots in a much more conscious way and see how we can leverage that, how we can extract as much understanding and learnings from that. And that's when sort of innovation starts kicking in. Because at that particular point in time, you are going from the mindset of coming up with something which is novel to actually applying it, shaping it, formulating it in a tangible way, and starting applying it to a problem. And that's the innovation part of the whole sort of aspect of creativity and innovation. And needless to say, this has to be followed up with prototyping, and we've had many speakers throughout the day speak to us about the importance of prototyping there. And rigorous prototyping comes when you actually start looking at your whole sort of network of ideas in a more scientific framework. That's when you start looking at a problem from all possible angles, and you continuously redefine the problem, break it down into its individual components, as I had demonstrated with that photograph where I had broken down into individual accords to tackle each one of them before I put them all together to complete the big picture. So it's the key thing is problem definition or job to be done, as we talked in the morning, which becomes really essential for us to design the right prototypes towards each of those problems in its most basic essential elements. Don't look at the problem in the whole, but look at it in its absolutely basic individual parts. Once we start doing the prototyping towards that, the feedback cycle with the problem definition allows us to gain more sophistication over our experimentation, and then we start building the whole picture. And within time, we realize that not only have we understood the basic issues of the larger picture, but we have actually solved the problem. So in sort of summary of what I think is the creative and innovation process, that it begins with the illumination, which is that initial spark that helps us to get associated with an idea, and then it is about how to actually embellish that idea by bringing in know-how from fields that are not related to yours. And that process is the cognitive creative process, and going from there, then it gets into the action of innovation, which is then prototyping and getting more and more sophisticated with your problem definition. And this is not a linear process. This is a very messy, back and forth, iterative process, but it's a lot of fun, yeah. So looking at it, yeah, we can start dipping, yeah. Looking at it from the point of view of flavors and fragrance industry. So now let's sort of scale it up from my little art for art's sake kind of experiment to what happens in consumer goods, especially in flavors and fragrances. So creative inspiration can come to a perfumer from many different sources. It could be a cocktail that you've had in a bar where the mixologist is a it's a really creative person. It could be that. It could be a flavor or a fruit that you've tasted on one of your travels overseas. It could be a geopolitical event, which and this actually has a huge influence on how we think, and that leads to different desires and wishes, and that leads to consumer goods companies, capitalizing on those desires and wishes of consumers. It could also be a new synthesis of a new molecule that is filling a gap that was never filled up in that way, and that could be inspiring to, and it can become central to the design of a whole perfume. So the inspiration can come in many different ways. Now, how do we then start relating the unassociated sort of ideas from different experiences in different fields into our thought process? Let's take an example with this picture. So suppose this picture is presented to a perfumer and they say, make a perfume based on this. And then I'd like your attention to be on 4 photographs out here. The kiwi fruit, the watermelon, the person tying the shoelaces, and the lime. Now, if you were to problem solve, if you were to remain within your sort of area of skills, you would say that, well, kiwi actually is a perfectly odorless fruit, and actually go back home and you can try it out. If you shave the rind of a lime or you cut a lime, it's very fragrant. You cut a watermelon, it's very fragrant. You do whatever to a kiwi, there is no smell. It is perfectly odorless. It has an amazing taste, but it is odorless. And obviously a walk on the beach is odorless as well. So one way of actually creating a perfume here would be actually to take the watermelon and the lime and create a fragrance centrally around those 2 ideas. Nothing wrong with that, but that's not being very creative. That's not innovative either. What would be interesting is that if I can interpret my own personal experience of walking not with shoes but bare feet on sand, and if I am able to convert that feeling of grittiness on my feet and smelling that mineral saltiness in the air, and if I can bring that into perfumery, now that would be something novel. And I would certainly get rewarded for that if I execute that very well. Of course, it can't be too out there, because then people are not going to like it, and we are in the business of delighting consumers. Similarly, if I were to actually take the experience of eating a kiwi fruit, that sweet, sour, acidic feel in my mouth, and if I can convert that using the language of perfumery, yes, it'll be a fantasy, because there's no such thing as a kiwi smell. But that would be a pretty cool experience for consumers, right? So for me, then creativity is about bringing some of your own experiences, which may be completely unrelated with what the photograph is directly communicating with you. Connecting the dots. And besides the interpretation of pictures, there is a lot more that we can do personally, as well as organizations, in terms of making sure that the dots are being connected and the transfer of knowledge to the person who is on a creative endeavor is seamless and smooth. If I were to be a really creative perfumer, I would do everything possible to understand the molecular properties that determine how the volatile materials from a perfume evaporate and spread into the air. And the other thing I would try and understand is how does our olfactory system interpret that and create an image of a fragrance in my mind. On this endeavor, my partners would not be other perfumers, and I would not just rely on myself, but I would be working closely with organic chemists and cell biologists to understand this phenomenon and to capture that. What exactly is the smell of clean? What exactly is the smell of love? What exactly is the smell of soft? These are all things that consumer goods companies demand of us. And they said, can you create that experience in our product? And if I understand how imagery is done in the mind as an outcome of the whole olfactive system, I would be able to do that much better. So that's how, I personally see creativity as pulling in those different sciences into my art. Targeted scent delivery. I designed fragrances for dishwashing detergents for the APAC region. It's not important for me to only design fragrances which make my product smell nice. I have to make the experience of washing dishes smell like the job is well done, and I have to assure the user of my product that my brand is your best friend. So that means that my perfume has to do something unique and interesting for the consumer when the consumer is actually using the product. So I need to understand how perfume partitions from surfactant to water, from water to air, and in what ratio is it partitioning, so that when it comes to my nose, it gives the imagery that I want it to give, the smell of clean and the smell of assurance that the job has been well done. So that is targeted scent delivery. And again, that comes not from my own personal experiences, but by working in a multidisciplinary way. So the organizations who are able to actually bring and co-locate, artists and scientists and people from various different fields together and allow a seamless transfer of knowledge, that's when, you go from an individual creativity to an organizational creativity. A lot has been said already about the user and the consumer, understanding your consumer. And this is, I think, one of the most important things. And for P&G, we've always said consumer is the king. So yes, the habits of the consumer and knowing your consumer is very, very critical. And then lastly, of course, the cultural preferences also play a major role. Vanilla is, when you make a lavender for the US, that lavender is actually more vanilla than lavender. And when you make a lavender for France or Germany, that lavender better be really authentic lavender, not the fantasy with vanilla. So, it's the same things don't work across. So, yeah. The point here, again, is it's really critically important to connect the dots if we want to be on a creative endeavor. So finally, bringing it all together. Now, I believe you all have blotters in your hand, and you're smelling the pointy side because that's where the perfume is on. This is the lady in blue, right? Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn. And basically what you're smelling is a combination of woody, smoky notes coming from vetiver, guaiac wood, and patchouli. And then there is a leather aspect that we'd also talked about. And on the top, I believe you must be getting this freshness from mint, and some spices, and bergamot, which is a citrus fruit. This is my last slide, so if there are any questions on the fragrance itself, I'm happy to take. Yes, please.
I was just interested. I think the fragrance has actually changed in the last 5 minutes when it first was handed round. I was wondering whether you actually did any sort of deliberate time delay in order to evoke a sort of progression through that user journey that we were seeing as it unfolded.
No, there's fragrance is a living being. It's an organism, and it will change with time. And it's just that. In fact, we try very hard for fragrances not to change. In many times that we deliver. Like, for example, when you make a fragrance for a detergent, you would like that kind of a scent to be continuously there throughout the usage experience, all the way to the end, and that doesn't happen, and we obsess over that particular piece. But yeah, those are the laws of entropy, and they can't be reversed. Yeah. Yeah.
No, it was a compliment, actually. I thought it was really exciting how it was evolving.
Thank you. Yeah. I'll take that as a compliment. Right. So putting it all together, what I think this perfume demonstrates is that interpretation of the photograph into from one art form, which is the visual art form, into the olfactive art form, which is really about creating this network of unrelated ideas, and that's the piece of the illumination, and then basically coming down the whole sort of cognitive process into action. It gets into prototyping of and succinct problem definitions, and that essentially is the key message that creativity and innovation is a combination of this cognitive process of getting inspired, then building on your inspiration to build on your inspiration by bringing in novel ideas from outside, and then go into a rigorous and succinct problem definition, and eventually prototyping towards that. Any questions from the audience at this point in time? Yes, please.
I was wondering that because more and more we're seeing there's a trend of people who wanted to customize their own fragrances, which is actually quite popular now. We've also heard that Gucci is embarking on a new initiative of creating a fragrance for gold, which doesn't have it's also an odorless fragrance, but it's for the branding purposes. And frankly speaking, we try to do that in the car as well. What would be the fragrance of sustainability? Does it have one? Which is contradictory, because it's more or less about adding sensorial stimuli to the customers. But I wonder whether this, based on your expertise, is there a trend or is there a tendency of people going for more odorless, reduced stimuli in order to feel what is substantially true to maybe the environment or the
absolutely.
material at all?
So I think there are a couple of questions in your question. The fragrance of the smell of sustainability. Now, you can look at it in many different ways. One is try and define something which is as define sustainability and translate it into fragrance. The other way is you create a fragrance using ingredients and you coming from sources that have a sustainability aspect to it. Like the previous gentleman who talked about the initiatives of social entrepreneurship that lead to the furnishings for IKEA. There are similar initiatives in building, in growing and farming rose oil, mint oil. In Madagascar, it's vanilla pods. So you could actually approach it in a way that you look at sustainability is a message that is coming from a fragrance that has been built out of a sustainable raw material coming from sustainable sources. So that's one. Secondly, the question is, does authenticity mean going nil fragrance? Is that your question? To some consumers, yes, definitely. But to other consumers, authenticity means just authentic fragrance. And authentic fragrance does not always have to be natural fragrance. It has to smell authentic. It can be completely synthetic. Actually, natural fragrances are the ones where 100% natural fragrances are the ones where sustainability is questionable at this particular point in time. Synthetic fragrances somehow we're finding it to be having less carbon footprint than natural fragrances. So that's a contradiction, but that's true simply because of the way these things are produced at the moment.